Modernist melancholia. Is this a modernist aesthetic? So the main thing to take away from this is a time period of redefining and upheaval. And the way I actually see this is through industry and the impact of the Great War. So one of the things that was happening was people were experiencing significant losses, and they actually had a name for people, or they had a name for the condition that people would come back with, which is shell shock, which we now know as post-traumatic stress disorder. But what this all did was it created this space where people were so heavily focused on production and pushing through these traumatic events that they started to experience loss of sense of self and state of being. So moving on to Sigmund Freud, he's the one who was looking at this idea of mourning and melancholia being connected, and he believed that the causes for both these conditions were the same, and they were due to environmental influences. So to Freud, melancholia was a prolonged state of mourning which was caused by loss. So melancholia in a cockroach. I'm not going to focus too much on absurdism, but the main point to take out of this is that it came from this time period because of everything that was happening, and it is a way of creating something so ridiculous that it forces you to reflect on what else is going on. And for this novel, it's the inciting incident and the complication of the story. So I believe that the absurd nature that Gregor finds himself causes him to reflect on his state of being, and the reflections of the experience become an allegory for melancholia. So we've got some textual evidence of him turning into a cockroach, which is the absurd nature. We have things that he's doing where he's not able to do human things like take off the cover, or he's doing odd things like crawling on the walls and the ceiling. So moving quickly into the melancholic worker, this is where I believe some of his melancholia actually starts to come from. So he is stuck in a position where he is just a tool of the chief. He is a tool of the industry, and he loses his sense of identity and his sense of being. And he ends up with these thoughts that he's spineless and stupid. And he hasn't gone sick once during 5 years of his employment. All this is happening in the setup of the story as well. So we are immediately getting the understanding that Gregor has this sense of resentment and anger towards his situation, towards his boss. He is exhausted with his job. He has anxiety because of it. He's not eating well. He's not making any connections with people, and he's doing this compare and despair thinking. He's looking at other people working and going, my situation is not good. And he cannot get himself out of this position. He feels stuck because he feels like he has to pay back this money for his parents' debts. He has to take on this responsibility. And this is where I think it leads into his melancholic state, because he spends most of the time on the story just in his room. And when he does venture outside of it, he is met with disdain because of the way he is, which is the cockroach. But if we remove the idea of the cockroach and just replace it with somebody who is extremely depressed, it starts to have a very bleak sort of look. And the idea of him losing his capacity to love, or losing his ability to actually do activities because he's a cockroach, because he's slowly having to give into these feelings of being this animal, being this insect. He's actually showing that somebody who's depressed loses their sense of humanity. So I believe the transformation of the cockroach is actually showing his lowering of his self-regard, and the painful dejection actually comes from his transformation, its consequences. We even get this sort of idea that the dull weather makes him feel melancholic. He wakes up and it's immediately dull weather, and he's like, this is out of the first lines. This is straight up. He's not feeling great. He's just really in this space where he's just feeling the weight, and he's resentful. He doesn't like things, and he just wants to be released from it. He would sacrifice everything to be released from it. And it occurs to him how simple it would be to actually move past some of these things that he's experiencing Again, it's because of the cockroach situation, but when we're looking at the idea of the cockroach being an allegory, he would benefit from having a bit of help. And over time, he experiences this feeling that he's nothing. His parents even view him as nothing. His sister views him as just this creature, and they want nothing to do with him. And he ends up dying, essentially, because he's this insect. Yeah, that's it.